this morning. So.
All right, so I'd like to call to order the Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Thursday, April 25th. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for being here, and I'd like to acknowledge that within the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. So first, are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Nothing from staff? So I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And we have our delegation back. That chair is going to be very comfy after a while.
Thank you for having me this No. It's then I can see the same page numbers that everybody up on the table has. Thank you so much. Ta-da. All right. This kind of feels like a continuation of the last meeting. So I will reintroduce myself for the minutes. My name is Paul Fripp. I'm partner with BDO Canada in our public sector audit group. I'm here today to present the results of our audit and review with you some of the key points of the audit results letter that we provided, which are included in your packages. All right, I will start by just discussing the audit report. As I mentioned, the audit report is restructured this year. It places our audit opinion right up front and expands on the roles and responsibilities between management, those charged with governance, and the auditor. One of the key points with regards to the regional district's audit report for this year is you'll notice that there is an emphasis of matter paragraph built into that audit report on page, let me get to it, on page 13 of your package. That emphasis of matter identifies that there was a restatement to the 2017 financial statements, and I will walk you through sort of the reasons behind that and the audit procedures that we carried out in relation to that prior period adjustment. It's important to note that paragraph there only draws attention to the restatement. It does not change our opinion on the financial statements as a whole. As a result, we anticipate providing an unqualified audit opinion on these financial statements. The next item I'll run you through is the concept of materiality. Materiality is the level by which we evaluate the financial statements for the regional district. The current year materiality level that was used was $900,000. That factor is based on 2% of the regional district's revenue base. Are there any questions so far? No? All right. I'm going to run through our key audit areas. These are areas that we spend an increased focus on during our audit by virtue of their complexity or susceptibility to misstatement. The first two areas that I'll run you through are prescribed audit areas in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. The first is management override. So management is in a unique position by virtue of their role to undermine internal controls. As a result, we contemplate this as part of our audit process to understand the potential for bias within the financial statements and review for those. We do this by looking at manual journal entries that are recorded within the records of the regional district, and we review any manual journal entries that sort of play to that perceived bias that exists. The second area is revenue recognition. Revenue recognition under public sector accounting standards is complex, particularly around government transfers. These are, sort of grants from other levels of government, and the standards by which that they're recognized as revenue within the financial statements has considerable judgment involved, and as a result, there can be potential to shift revenues from one period to another. The testing that we carry out on these revenue sources is by reviewing the agreements, specifically for stipulations that exist within those agreements to ensure that if revenue's been recognized, that the regional district has extinguished those stipulations. Where stipulations exist that give rise to a liability, so if you don't fulfill those responsibilities and you would have to otherwise pay back the money, and that grant revenue then gets deferred as a liability on the statement of financial position. Our audit testing in this area was carried out without exception. The third area I'd like to walk you through is with regards to contributed tangible capital assets, and this relates to the prior period adjustment that was recorded in this year's financial statements. So contributed tangible capital assets, because they're non-cash transactions, they are inherently more challenging to detect. As well, there's a significant amount of judgment involved in valuing those assets. So the amount of revenues that you recognize and the amount of tangible capital assets that you recognize is subject to judgment. In an attempt to identify a complete set of contributed tangible capital assets, we review correspondence and reports and minutes and your legal invoices to try to identify specific developments that might give rise to contributed tangible capital assets. Where we are aware of contributed tangible capital assets, we review the engineering reports or developer reports for support of those values and the underlying source documentation that follows that. So a number of contributed tangible capital assets was detected by management. I'm not sure if it was before or during the audit process, which was sort of a stream of non-standard contributions over an extended period of time, which added up to an immaterial amount, but management felt that it was more transparent to record these as an adjustment to prior period rather than to record them through the current year. If we look through, I don't have the financial statements open, let me get them open. So if we look at page 2 of the financial statements, sorry, note 2 of the financial statements, if I can get there. Is that right? There we go. You'll notice that the total amount of contributed assets was approximately $360,000. And the impact to the operating, of your package, page 34 of your package. And you'll notice that this has a very nominal impact to the operating surplus last year of $4,879. These are all non-cash transactions, so they don't impact the amount of tax revenues that you might otherwise have collected or requisitioned for. The structure of Note 2 is intended to provide users with a direct correlation back to the previously issued financial statements. So it takes each line from the prior year financial statements, it shows the adjustment and shows the corrected value for users. Unless there's any questions, then I'll move on from that one.
Director Hills?
Thanks. So it's a continuous stream of assets that are acquired over a 10-year period. It was 2007 to 17, and it was the water mains. So my question is this like distribution mains, or is this like water meters, like off of the water meters? This might not be a question for you. I'm wondering about the accumulation of these stream of assets.
I couldn't directly answer that right at the moment.
I think we'll go to staff for that.
So, I was going to address that in the staff part, but so what occurred was when we took over the North and South Pender Harbor water facilities, and we also, there were some, I believe, potentially some wastewater facilities too that were part of this transition of a subdivision. Those particular assets within that subdivision, as we took over the system and the subdivision was happening, they were kind of happening in tandem. And so what we discovered was that those were not included when we transferred over the system. It was an item that was from back in 2000, started as far back as 2007. And again, that's the time when the new standards were coming into effect as well for reporting tangible capital assets through public sector accounting standards. So many things were converging at the same time. But again, management brought this to the auditor's attention and felt that it was a little more transparent. And this has happened in the past where we have discovered assets that we own. This is quite common in local government as a consequence of the new standard. The practice has been to restate our financial statements, so we felt it was most appropriate to be consistent in that manner, so we chose to restate it and hence note 2 there. Even though it's not material and we had another option to address the item, we felt this was the most appropriate.
Any other questions before we go on? Thank you. Director Tighe?
Yeah, I just have some questions around asset management and how that does get put back into the financial as we get a clearer picture of what assets we actually do have. Is there? I appreciate that we're even using stuff that's non-material because it all accumulates over time and eventually it does become material. So I'm just wondering, how does the asset management estimation actually happen, and is that mostly done by staff? Do the auditors actually look at the estimates on that, or is that just or do we get consultants to come in, that kind of thing?
I think that's a staff question.
So that's a very good question, and I think that it's really important to understand that the financial statements, when we report our tangible capital assets, are based on historical costs. So it's actually the cost of which we purchase those particular assets. What the practice of asset management is to record what the replacement costs of the assets are. We don't report that in our financial statements, what the replacement costs of some of these particular ones. So it's a good point that from a correlation between financing your future, looking at amortization, is that your best management or your best measurement on making sure you're replacing? There are different opinions on that because, of course, it depends what assets. So internally what we do is we do use several different methods to determine our replacement costs. In some cases we do it through consultants, through engineers, through qualified quantity surveyors. So it really depends what the asset classes are, and sometimes we do use our internal staff. And again, that's a different process about how to sustainably fund a service. So,
Director McMahon.
Oh, that was interesting. So if we acquire, say, a sewer system or a water system like Grantham's or like Wood Creek Park, we don't actually know what they paid for those assets. So I assume that when we acquire them, we make some guesstimate of what the value of those assets are.
Staff?
No, actually, the developers provide us with the what they actually paid for those particular assets. So in the case of restating our finance, we actually found what was determined, and it was verified by a third party as to what those particular assets that were put into the ground. And there generally is some staff oversight with some of these projects. So yes, we do get that information.
Any other questions? I think we can move on.
All right. Well, just in relation to contributed tangible capital assets, we did raise a management letter point with regards to this matter, and management has addressed that for you, but I believe that we've sufficiently discussed it at this time, unless there's any other questions.
You're talking about your whole presentation in the documents?
Yeah.
This would be a question to Tina. I have some questions about page 21. Is that going to come during your presentation? Okay. Director Hiltz.
The management as a term, and the date of the letter is April 16th, and I'm not sure when. I'm trying to define management when there's turnover of senior leadership. How does that affect the audit in terms of management? That's what the concept I'm trying to understand.
So the term management would be applied to sort of the organization as a whole. Where there's departures and key individuals, that there would still be those responsibilities that person fulfilled that would still need to be fulfilled by individuals acting within the organization. So on the conclusion of the audit, there's still a requirement for someone acting on behalf of the regional district to provide us with a signed letter of representation and a number of other documents to basically approve off on the audit.
Director McMahon?
Yes. The phrase amortization is unfunded. I think I know what you mean by that, but it wouldn't hurt to check in.
What page are you referring to?
It comes up on page 33 in the financial statements, so that might be a question for later. Sorry.
I think that's going to be part of a bit of a longer
All right.
discussion.
We'll put a hold on
definitely
that.
Come up. Director Beamish?
Yes, thank you. I didn't know if you were going to cover these points by point, but on page 9, you refer on the key audit areas, refer the dump, our garbage dump, and you look at that in terms of landfill closure and post-closure liability. Do you do anything on risk assessment relative to the fact that we do not have a post-closure plan for the landfill? Is that mentioned anywhere? And you look at that? Because we don't know where we're going come 6 years or 7 years from now. Thank you.
That's a great comment. Financial statements are inherently historic, and so we're often looking backwards when everybody at the table here is looking forwards. We do obtain landfill liability reports which provide details on the anticipated future closure costs related to the landfill and the current capacity of the landfill. It's those inputs that form the basis for that liability, and once we have reasonable assurance over that liability level, that's where our work tends to end.
Follow-up?
Yeah, I guess I'm assuming that there might be kind of a looking at that risk of saying, as an auditor, saying, well, what's your plan? Do you have a plan come the closure of the site? Just to identifying it as something that we should be aware of, or a board. When we get down to 5 years from now, if you were looking at landfill closure liabilities and no plan, I would think there would be a risk identified at some point.
there's potentially an operational risk there, but there may not be an audit risk. And so we do have operational discussions with management to identify risks in general and where we can assist on operational risks. We certainly do endeavor to have those conversations. From an audit perspective, you may not have a plan, but all that's going to happen is that liability is going to keep kind of creeping up and growing bigger. So that's from a financial statement perspective, that's just is how it is. Yeah.
Follow up?
No, just a comment again. I think we have similar risk in terms of water. We continue to grow, but we don't continue to have capacity, and it's again one of those things that I appreciate. It's not an audit thing, but it is an audit thing in one sense, in terms of the future. Yeah.
One thing I will comment on is that there are new standards coming down the pipeline. So in 2022, asset retirement obligations are coming into effect. As part of that, it's going to look at your whole infrastructure base and require that any retirement costs associated with your infrastructure gets reflected into the financial statements. So I think the lens at that point is going to be far more comprehensive. I only mention it here in this forum because that is quite a big work project, and so management will need the support of the board in carrying out that task.
So your job is to not determine if we're going in the right direction, but whatever direction we're going in, are we actually recording it properly in our financial statements?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that being said, I mean, that's in the context of the engagement that we're discussing here today. You know, I'd like to think that we form collaborative relationships with our clients and we can help out beyond just the audit process, but that's outside of the scope of our discussion today.
And Tina, you had something to contribute?
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of the things that I think is being touched on in the context of whether it be solid waste, water, et cetera, and those forward-thinking type of things, the tool that a lot of local governments and a lot of public sector and even private sector companies use is a business continuity plan. I know the province is very much focused in this. There's a lot of discussion with whether it be with the Municipal Finance Authority doing some work on that. So that's something that senior leadership has discussed about bringing to the board for future consideration, because it is quite a monumental task to do overall, but there's definitely some incremental approaches that you can take, even to the extent of how do we incorporate our emergency management. So I think you'll be hearing some more about that, because I think it's not an isolation of each of the individual services. It's more as a sustainability issue for the organization as a whole.
Any other questions at this point? Did you have further before we go in camera?
No, I do not.
Okay, so on our agenda, there's a request that we go in camera and the public be excluded from attendance in accordance with Section 91C and K of the Community Charter. So I'd like a motion to do that. Moved and seconded. Somebody second? Second. All those in favor? Thank you. And we'll wait for do they know that we're back in? Okay, thanks. Okay, while we're waiting for all of those to come back in, all right, let's look. Look for a motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So we'll move to item number 3, page Annex B. And this is, I'll turn this over to Tina. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is really just staff's perspective to give an overview to the board on the reasons why you see the financial statement. So, of course, it's required through legislation, through the community charter. And so, again, that's part of why we have an external auditor review our financial statements. So in part of this, we understand, and it's been mentioned already, the financial statements are really retrospective in nature, so they're backwards looking. They're not forward looking, and they're for a date and time. So for December 31st, 2018 is to where these results are being presented. Things forward looking, like our budget or our variance reporting, is part of the continuum of reporting to the board as part of their responsibilities. So I did just highlight a few points in helping to understand, if those of you who haven't seen public sector accounting related statements, they are a little bit different than if you look at private sector statements. So I've given a few highlights as far as when reading and understanding the financial statements, what you can understand. So the statement of financial position would be equating to a balance sheet. Statement of operations would be like an income statement. So, and also, I've also highlighted a few points, which sometimes in the past our auditors have highlighted, but some of the terms included in the financial statements are important to understand the results. So, for instance, one of the terms used, which is accumulated surplus, is not, it's an indication of the overall health of the organization, and includes all the capital assets, but it doesn't really say that it's not to conclude from a reader's perspective that there's a large cash surplus available to us. The same is for the annual operating surplus, meaning that based on how public sectors have to report their operating statements, it doesn't mean that that is also a cash surplus available for use. So just getting into a little bit more of the statement of financial position and statement of change in net debt, so getting into the statements themselves. So the regional district as a whole.
Yes? Do you want to point us to particular pages when you're doing this?
I can. So, so if you go to page number 27 of your agenda. So the statement of financial position. So this one here, and again, this is what I'm referencing in page 79 of my staff report. And essentially, the regional district back in 2017 was the first time in many years that the regional district transitioned from a statement of net debt to a statement of net assets. So again, we've provided a little overview of the financial health of the regional district. So if you see back in 2014, we were in a statement of net financial debt of $13 million, and now we're in a position of net financial assets of over $7 million. So really that's just an indication that our assets overshadow our liabilities. And so that's a clear indicator of the financial health of the organization. Okay. So our statement of operations, which is on page 29 of the agenda here, some things there is that, again, we are seeing that our revenues actually exceeded our budgeted expenses, and that's a result of realizing some increases in user fees, building permit fees, landfill tipping fees, and our water utilities due to growth. So again, those are things that we budget, but we don't always foresee how those types of things. And again, that's what we report on the variance analysis. So those are also very positive indicators to the regional district. So some of the things that have been highlighted by our auditors is the prior period restatement. So we have discussed that one a little bit, and again, how the management has taken the approach of restating the financial statements instead of just doing an adjustment. The other financial indicators that we wanted to highlight, which are on page 80 of the staff report, but also just want to bring to your attention as part of the statements. So again, in our statement of financial position, our portfolio investments, so again, page 27, but there's also notes to the financials giving some more detail on this, is that our portfolio investments are higher than what was anticipated, and that's just realizing some timing of cash flows, et cetera. So that's just a timing difference of when we're reporting those particular items. The other item of note is a provision for landfill closure and post-closure. So there's a minor increase to that particular liability, but I think the financial health overall of that one is quite positive. And again, that one relates to several facets within the financial statements. So there's statement of financial position, but there's also some notes in the financial statements to that. So that one has been a lot of focus and attention, and I think this is where in 2017, and again, there's an unfunded liability associated with the landfill closure. So back in 2017, we were only funding about $300,000 towards that liability. In 2018, staff brought forward a report.
Sorry, per year?
Per year.
Okay.
We brought a report in 2018 about the financial outlook of the landfill, and in 2018 there was a decision made by the board to incrementally increase that contribution by $125,000 per year till it reaches $800,000. So for 2018 it was $425,000 we were contributing. For 2019 we're contributing $550,000, and so forth to 2021 when we have $800,000. So at that particular moment in time, and I think we're still on track for funding our post-closure, our closure and post-closure funding requirements for the future. And so that, again, is a positive financial indicator for the regional district. And again, Schedule 14, so that is our statement of reserves. And that particular page is the last schedule of the financial statements, which is page 75 and 80 of your agenda. And I think this is just an indicator where future discussions will be had, and I think it links a little bit to the point of asset management that was brought up earlier, and the unfunded amortization. And I think that discussions in the future will be about we are contributing towards our reserves for future capital replacement. And so tying our contributions to reserves to either the funding or unfunding of amortization is something that we need to address, and potentially as part of a reserve policy. So those are things to come as well. So I'm just going to pause there. Those are some of the highlights from the financial statements. The rest of my report speaks to more forward-looking type of items.
Okay, Director Mann, did you want to address the unfunded liability that you were talking about earlier?
No, I'm just curious what exactly is meant by unfunded amortization. Yeah.
So amortization is what is used, or depreciation is another term that you may have used, and that relates to our capitalizing our tangible capital assets. So if something has a useful life of 20 years, you amortize that over its 20 years till it no longer has any depreciation. So right now, when we transferred over from the public sector accounting standards in 2009, there was a decision made that we wouldn't fund that particular expense in our financial statements. So it's unfunded currently, so we don't tax for it or use any other fees. But that's where the linkage between contribution to reserves and not funding our amortization, just making some linkage there, because I would argue that in some cases, in some services, we are funding the amortization. To what extent, we haven't measured that directly yet.
Director Lee?
I'm not sure that this is necessarily the time for the discussion, but I wouldn't mind your opinion. We talk about asset management, and for things like the water and the wastewater systems, we are putting money away for the future to kind of make sure that we can keep it going rather than have it fail. But in the case of the landfill, we're very deliberately planning for the closure, but we are not planning for the next step, and so we aren't putting any money away. We haven't put enough money away for the closure, far less enough money to fund the next step. And so, and I can think of a few other things like water, like Bill mentioned. Is there an accounting practice for that, or is there a directive from municipal affairs, or how the heck do we do that? Or do we just get together and decide what we're going to do?
I'll look to staff. I think it's the latter.
I think there's multiple tools in our future toolbox that we're going to have to use in order to address some of those, whether it be really detailed asset management plans that staff have already highlighted to make sure our fees cover, but also that we have even an understanding of what our operational, maintenance, and future capital needs are. So that's what the focus is and what really the business case for getting the new asset management resource. So that's the focus there. As it relates to future looking, that too would be a service plan, whether it be for or comprehensive plans, so revisiting master plans, etc. So that's how all those tools, but how they all tie in together is, I think, some of the challenges with regional districts. So how do you look at all of those different things in entirety on how they affect the organization? And I think that's the business continuity plan.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, I think related to that, and the previous question I asked on the landfill was one again. We see it on the horizon. We know what's coming, and it's looming faster, sort of thing. It's just a matter of being how have we not anticipated, or have we anticipated? I do believe we did agree that we would ask staff this year to begin to look at that picture. But have we budgeted any money for that purpose to do that? And do we need to do that for this year? And maybe staff could let me know if we actually have money set aside.
Staff?
Yes, and for anyone who's been looking at solid waste for the last 10 years understands that we've always kind of been on the heels. So again, from raising our tipping fees to where they are today was one of those items. But addressing the future needs is not currently being funded, and there's not a clear plan developed as of yet.
Looks like Mr. Rosenboom.
In addition, the only thing I would like to add to that is that on the May infrastructure services agenda, there will be a report forthcoming on, as per the request by the board, on next steps in terms of siting of a landfill or other options to be considered. So I think this is a good discussion to have when that report is in front of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to go back to the unfunded liability for the landfill. And during our agenda review meeting, I asked about that, and I guess there was a report that came in November or something to the previous board. My concern is, are we going to have sufficient funds set aside already when we need them? And I think there's indication that report actually was provided previously, but it's something I think information could come forward to this board. Tina?
So in light of the report coming to the May infrastructure about the future state, perhaps what we could do as a backgrounder is provide the report that was actually provided in February of 2018, and it's the landfill financial outlook. And so we could potentially include that as part of the agenda. And if there's anything further that the board would like to see subsequent to that, then we can provide it in a future agenda.
Okay, would you like that as an emotion, or do you just want to bring that forward?
Yeah, for just continuity, that'd be a good idea.
That the February 2018 report
on landfill financial outlook
be brought forward as part of the May infrastructure meeting. Okay. Second? All those in favor? Any other comments about this? McMahon.
Sorry, I have lots of picky little questions, but they're not on landfill.
Are we finished with landfill? Director Beamish.
No, and I guess it's just one, and I'll look forward to the report coming forward, but we seem to be putting a lot of energy in the cost of finding water alternatives, but not as much energy in the cost of finding landfill alternatives, and they are both important. And one may be more critical weather-wise, but the other one's going to be critical to us all. So I appreciate the staff's doing that.
Thank you. All right, so we're done with landfill. Any other questions in these financial statements, reports? Director McMahon, I know I have a bunch too. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll just start throwing them out, and then you can give other people turns. On page 54, we seem to be running a surplus in animal control and economic development, and I was wondering about that. And animal control turns up again on page 75 with a bunch of money in animal control reserves. So are we not controlling animals, or are they better behaved than they used to be, or what's happening there?
Staff.
So again, there is a little more detail. So on page 54, that's the roll-up of the financial reporting requirements. There is a little more detail, again, in some of the other subsequent schedules as well. So on page 63, you'll see there that some of the related surplus for animal control is due to staff vacancies. So there, and then the reserve side of the house is that some years ago, there was a reserve established for vehicle replacement, and that is the reserve for animal control because they do need specialized vehicles, and so we're funding that particular vehicle replacement on an ongoing basis. So it will build up, get spent, build up, spent. So there's a plan associated with that.
Next.
Okay, and in regard to that, I make note that I read a report today that said that the federal government's $5,000 rebate on electric vehicles is applicable to municipalities for up to 10 vehicles. So I hope we take full advantage. Let me see. In page 75, there's reference to electoral area services and areas B and D feasibility studies. What are areas B and D feasibility studies?
And Tina?
So those particular services are when we're contemplating creating a new service for the regional district. And those particular amounts in those balances relate to setting up recycling for those particular areas. So we actually taxed back then, but we never used the funds, so they're just sitting in sort of a surplus account.
Go ahead.
Also sitting in a surplus account, more or less, are Half Moon Bay and Roberts Creek smoke control. So when we have these accounts that we didn't need, is there a point where we review them and say, well, we don't need these accounts? Like, could the smoke control money be put to, as a once only, into bylaw enforcement, which is really what it was for? Or or are we stuck with this forever?
Staff?
So those particular functions, so those actually have bylaws associated with those particular reserves. So as a regional district model, we cannot move those funds to another service. Those services still are a function of the regional district. What we've done in the past, though, is if we haven't needed the funds or not wanted to tax, is we've used some of those funds to offset taxation in future years, sort of as a rate stabilization model. So that can be contemplated in the future if required. And if that was something that wanted to be revisited for the 2020 budget, then we can make a motion to that effect.
Yes. Would you like to make a motion to that effect, that we revisit these?
Oh, sure. Why not? Yeah, because if we do have funds that are just sitting on the books not doing anything, let's
or
you know,
they're old and outdated,
or they're
whatever.
outdated, or you know, it's worth at least taking a look at. If it's more effort than it's worth to dissolve them, then I understand that too. But we have a number of weird little funds, like having 3 grant and aids. Well, actually 4 grant and aids between 2 areas is another odd one.
So what would you like a motion to say to address this, Tina?
It's hard for staff to answer that question.
Make it go in?
It's more, what I'm hearing is whether or not there's any, there was two sides to what I was hearing here. One
Yeah.
was more, what do we do with funds that don't appear to be accumulating as it relates to smoke control, and whether or not there's any options to offset future taxation from a rate stabilization model. And when I use that term, it's aligned with financial sustainability policy, so you don't create those huge variations in taxation. So we could do that for 2020. And from the second part of what was addressed was those functions of the regional district that aren't currently appear to be active at the moment.
Yes.
That's a more complicated one to address. Because again, there's bylaws, there's services established, there's local service areas with BC assessment. It's much more complicated. It's not simply deciding that you no longer want those services.
Right, but I think what we want some assurance on is that those services are still actually required, that it's not just something that we're keeping on the books forever and it's gone away. So I think that's kind of what you're looking at. Director McMahon?
Yeah, or this may not be the year to tackle it either, because this stuff accumulates over the course of time. But at some point in the future, it'd be nice to tidy things up a bit. If we do have services we're not using, like.
So what do you have down as a motion? Because there might be a way to actually deal with both of those. It might be that we ask staff to, during the budget approval or the budget process in fall of 2019 for 2020, staff review the reserve balances and identify potential ways to deal with them in, provide information back to the board. So not saying we have to fix them this year, but let us know what the status of them is so that we can look at dealing with them at some point. Does that work for you? Okay. Does that work for you? Okay. All right. So would you like to make that motion?
What she said.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor? Thank you. All right. Director McMahon.
Okay, I have one more. It's from a footnote. It turns out the SCRD has a demonstration forest at Hillside. Who knew? Well, I didn't know. I would like to know more about this demonstration forest and interpretation area, parklands, and protected habitat areas, none of which I've ever actually heard of before. And, what is it doing? What are we doing with it? What is it? Perhaps to a future, would that be infrastructure or planning?
Tina?
Yeah, what we could do is provide sort of just a brief overview of Hillside Development Service. I think that can encapsulate lots of different historical contexts. We could also do a lunch and learn, or we could actually do a staff report to a future committee.
Okay. Would you like a staff report or a lunch and learn? Take your pick.
That's a good question. It's just, I tend to like to go less formal where we can. It's just that we haven't been finding any time for lunch lately.
So we do the learn but not the lunch?
Yeah, all right. Let's try that as a lunch and learn for a start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. And do you need a motion for that one? No, thank you. Okay. Any other questions for you? All right. Any others before I get into a few of mine? Director Hiltz, did you have some? Okay. I wanted to point to page 36 in our package around the portfolio investments. And I just wanted to commend the staff for taking some of the investments that we have and putting them with the local credit union. Our Sunshine Coast Credit Union actually provides a lot back to our community. And by taking some of our funds and putting them there, we're actually assisting them in contributing. So I want to thank you for that. Okay, let me look at a few of the other notes here I've got highlighted. Deferred revenue other. This is on page 38. So I understand the Cemetery Care Fund, the Half Moon Bay Community Association. Then there's grant funding and other. I'm wondering if you could explain those. Particularly under other, we had 214,000. There were inflows of 583, and we actually spent some. So what is other?
That could be things like amenities agreement funds.
Do you want to elaborate a bit on that?
It could be, it's a combination of many different pots. We can provide some more details on each one. I don't have the list in front of me here, but I know that some of those amenities funds are in there too. So past funding agreements, that they flow through the revenues.
So I'm just going to go through a few more pages here. Page 40. Long-term debt. And in your financial statements, you also include the debt issued for the member municipalities. Do you also then include the payments and the principal and interest payments that they made, or how is that in here in our financial statements?
So if you go to the statement of financial position, and also the statement of operations. So if you look to the statement on page 27, you'll see that we do have the long-term debt, but then we have, from the financial assets, we offset it in our balance sheet as far as what's to be recovered. So as those principal and interest payments happen, that amount reduces. So both those sides reduce. How they flew through our statement of operations is also, we have a function for member municipality debt. So on page 29 of the financial statements, you'll see that there's revenues of 1.9 million, and that's to pay for some of those principal and interest payments. So that's how they flow through our statements.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I was just looking at page 40 and just curious. It seems that we're really paying very little off on the principal on some of these debts. Like the Agawam Volunteer Fire Department, it's only been a change of, $200 and some from one year to the next, and it's only a $50,000 loan. So I'm wondering, how long is this debt going to be on our books for?
It actually has when it matures, right? So that one's in 2026.
Oh, so why is it?
Maybe you want to explain. Yes, thanks.
Yes, so I think that understanding how long-term debt with a local government is determined. So when you are issuing your loans, when you decide you're going to be going to long-term funding, you decide on a term. As part of deciding that term, you then enter into an agreement with the Municipal Finance Authority as to whether or not you want to have it fixed for the term of the debt. It's not like a mortgage where you can pay a certain principal amount per year. That's not an option because these are then turned into debentures out there in the marketplace. So what happens is that the term you set, and some of the regional districts' debt, why we're actually showing some higher interest, is that when we decided to go for debt for whether it be the Field Road building or all the ones that have very high interest, there was a decision made at that particular time to fix the principal and interest payment and the term of the debt for the duration of the debenture, which was 20 years at that particular time. We have other vehicles with MFA that were for a 20-year term, but at the 10-year mark, we could have an interest reset. And so there's two sides to that. Either you take a risk to it being higher, or in some cases, when we had long periods of very low interest rates, that became favorable to the regional district and the functions that had the debt at that particular time. So that was the case with several functions where we had a debt reset, which then we didn't have to fund as much to pay for those remaining principal and interest payments. So that's where right now, even if we wanted to pay off some of those debt, we are not able to because that's the agreement that we have with the Municipal Finance Authority.
I also just realized that I misread one of the numbers, so, but thank you for the explanation nonetheless.
Okay, so I have one more clarification question. Page 106. It's a small. No. Well, it's in the financial statement. It's number 609, function 609 or bylaw 609 for the Gibsons and Area Library Capital. It's showing a closing balance of $26,431, and yet the budgeted transfers are $50,000. I'm just wondering if you could explain that piece.
So are you looking on page 106 of the agenda, or are you looking on page 75, 76 of the financial statement? Okay, so there is an amount of 100 or so thousand within that reserve, but we also contribute 50,000 per year towards that particular reserve.
Okay. So it's an investment of reserve. Okay, to the reserve. Okay.
Yeah, and so we tax for that and we contribute towards it, and it's tied to the facility condition assessment and the future projects we're going to need to fund in the future for that building.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions on? Yes, Director McMahon.
There's actually a follow-up to your observation about the credit union. Somewhere in this I read, and now I can't find it, that there is a policy about where we invest our money. And I notice it appears that we've been moving away from the local credit union and over to Blue Shore a whole lot. And I'm just wondering, how are those decisions made about investment?
Staff?
So we do have an investment policy. And so, again, we work with our auditors, and we did a few years ago as well, where one of the audits reports back was that we were too heavily weighted into one particular organization versus the next. So as part of our investment policy, there was sort of a diversification that included in that. So when we have funds available to invest, we solicit all the organizations and we get the best rates. So again, all of this is depicted within the investment policy. Where there's an opportunity to invest locally, we do provide that. But we wouldn't want to be 100% exposed in one particular organization over the next. That just would be a risk to the regional district. So we try to balance that out, and sort of 25% has been some of the thresholds talked about, but there's nothing formalized.
Director Beamish?
Just further to Director Tice's question on debt repayment, my recollection was that when we have debt with MFA and we keep our payments up on a regular basis and do it all, that at some point in time a certain amount is forgiven or returned to us. Is that correct? And yeah.
Tina?
So that was one of the items we talked about in that other revenue. So that's part of our sinking fund. And so that's one of the benefits of the Municipal Finance Authority, is that those particular funds are invested and it benefits the local governments at the end. For example, I know other local governments on a 20-year debt, at year 18, they no longer have any debt payments to do. So because the sinking fund has made enough money in order to meet the needs of those last 2 years.
Okay. Any other questions on the financial statements? So I'm going to look to page 77. Sorry, Tina?
Thank you, Chair. I just had a few items that within my report that didn't address. They spoke more to some of the future, very, very quick to touch on. One is one of the items that was already addressed, which is the pending accounting standards. So staff have highlighted that in page 80. It's something that came forward last year as part of the audit, but again, it was just part of a white paper with the public sector accounting standards. Now it's been formalized. We have a very clear understanding of what's going to be required of the regional district and of public sector. So again, we have to meet those standards by 2022, and so in 2023 2020, as part of budget, staff will be bringing most likely a budget proposal as to what our implications to meet those obligations in the future will be. And also just highlighted a few items as far as the management letter that is also highlighted in the report. So any further questions?
Any other questions? Okay, so I'll refer you back to page 77, and there are a couple of recommendations on there. We've received the report. We're also looking at the draft audited statements for the year ended December 31st, 2018 be approved as presented, and further that the recommendation be forwarded to the board meeting on April 25th, 2019. Moved? Seconded? Any other discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you being here. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to pack up and get out. Does anybody need a break for 5 minutes? Perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the directors back to the table so we move this forward. Okay, while we're getting settled, I'm going to ask you to pull the big copy out that we have. So staff printed out the budget project status report for your review. So what I'd like is to start at the top, go down number by number. If there's anybody who has any questions about any of these, to come forward. Director Hiltz.
Number one.
Good place to start.
I'm just contrasting this with in the 2018 November, and it was the majority of the repairs are underway, and there was looking at the need for additional repairs in Q12. So is this additional repairs, and is this done by staff or done by contractors, kind of?
And staff?
Thank you for the question. These were indeed additional repairs that were we identified in January some opportunities to do some additional repairs. Since this report has been released, the repairs have been completed, and I'm happy to report that they've been really successful, and no further repairs are required at this time.
Thank you. Any others on this page? Director McMahon.
Number 3, our corporate space and site planning. I am wondering if we have a plan to make this building zero emissions.
And staff?
So that particular project is, we're just waiting for the draft report from the consultants. And so as part of that project, as it evolves, the implementation, that's where those discussions can be had. So it'll be a phased approach, but most certainly how that would result is a discussion that we'd need to have with the board.
Okay. Anything else on the first page? Flip that, Director Pratt.
Sorry, that'll be me. I just wanted to just make a comment on number 5 that it's very promising to hear that there was a strong response for the questionnaire that went out on bylaw 310. So that's actually exciting to hear that. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll look at page 2, and this is numbers 6 through 18. Any questions on any of those? Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say I sure do appreciate this list. I kept it already on my computer, so thank you. And specifically on number 6, it looks like we have some funds to do asset management projects. How will we decide which ones to do?
Staff?
So this was actually a grant we received or were awarded back in 2016. It was a Strategic Priorities Fund, gas tax funding, to implement our asset management software. So at that time, we were implementing our financial software. So we completed that project, but there were funds remaining. And so at that particular time, we brought a report to the board to change the scope to allow us to do condition assessments. So that's actually how we funded the wastewater plants and several reviews of, say, the ranger station, et cetera, and ports as well. So there's a lot of work still to be done, and so we're looking to complete these particular projects this year. So the funds, I think, are fully committed already. So we look to complete those projects and bring future reports to the board. So they've been fully committed.
Anything else on page 2? If not, let's move to page 3, numbers 19 through 35.
Yeah, I just have a question on the item number 32. And I'm just wondering why a project completed in 2017 still needs a right-of-way. Shouldn't those be kind of done before you do the project? And is that something that got caught afterwards? Not start.
Number
Yeah, well, exactly.
32.
We don't have the right-of-way yet,
Okay.
but we've completed the project.
Staff, do you want to comment on that one?
I will. The project was completed, and for most of the owners, we received the permission to enter their property to install the water main. There's still some ongoing discussion with some of the landowners on the actually establishment of the right-of-way. So it is. We received from most landowners the permission to enter the property to install, but the formalization of the right-of-way afterwards, that's where we are now. That's where the hiccup is.
And that's in process?
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions on page 3? Director Beamish.
Item 21 on the training for emergency planning, emergency preparedness. Is there a profile of who received the training from various organizations or communities we have on that? Was there some from Gibson's on that training, some from Seashell, some from SCRD, or how was that done?
And do you have any of that information? There's been some transition in that department.
Yeah, I don't have specifics on this particular issue, but I do know that as opportunities arise, they are forwarded to all our member municipalities, and we are trying to keep track of who actually attends so that we have a bit of an understanding in the event of an emergency where we can draw resources.
I do know that there were 2 sessions that were held. One was internal only because member municipalities were not invited to that one. But then another one, I know that some of our staff did attend.
Yeah, just like, I think the nature of that training, if there was an incident well, say at the Chapman Creek Bridge, and you couldn't get through for one reason or other, you've got people to draw on from Gibson's and the regional district, or if it was the other direction, you got people to draw on from Seashell and the regional district. You got to make sure that you got that balance there.
I can let you know that we have identified already in Seashell people who have the training and the background to be able to do some of that, and that is something on our radar as well, given the Chapman Creek Bridge. Any other concerns about or questions about page 3? Move over to page 4. Director Hiltz.
Thanks. Top of the page again, number 33. Let me see if I can. The UV reactor.
36, are you looking at?
I'm on page 86, item line number 33.
So that's number IS 365, Rosenboom 145,000, that one?
Yes, 33.
Okay. So it's on page 3.
Oh, you're going on this page, I'm going on, okay, that page. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the question is about the redundancy, and so my understanding of this facility was built in 2012, 2013. It didn't have redundancy in it. And I'm thinking of another facility like the Chapman, which was built in 2004, 2005, and I'm wondering, during the tour, I almost thought that there was only one reactor at the Chapman. So does this condition exist in the Chapman plant as well, in terms of the redundancy?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. In Chapman, there is sufficient redundancy available, which is not the case in Garden Bay.
Okay, so move over to page 4 again, starting numbers 36 through 51. Any questions on these pages? Director Hiltz.
Item number 41, the regional well protection plan. Does this include the Grantham's well then? Or is that, I'm just wondering about the relationship of the well protection for Grantham's and the proposed Church Road well field. So I'm just looking at timing here on those.
Staff?
Thank you for the question. This project is specifically for the Chester well upgrades.
Okay, any other questions on this page? Flip over to page 5. Numbers 52 through 62. No questions on this page. Director Hiltz?
On the Granthams, and just about updating the values, like it's now called the rehabilitation project, and the funding sources, I don't believe are any capital reserves. It was taxation, gas tax, and IPP, so I'm just wondering about updating the data.
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So the difference in how the project is presented here is just a question of timing. So this was prepared prior to the recent revisions and will be updated going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions on this page? Director Brown and then Director Lee.
I'm sorry, I just can't resist the cemetery business plan. You know, if we relaxed our safety standards, we could drum up a lot more business for the cemetery. Just
Director Lee. We don't have staff respond to that one. Director Lee.
And media, please not either.
I think old age will keep that particular business going. I was looking at line item 55. I'm kind of curious that we're maintaining dikes. I wasn't sure that was our business. Could you let me know what that is?
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So perhaps this is a topic to include in the Lunch and Learn, but one of the pieces of infrastructure at Hillside Industrial Park is a flood control dike adjacent to a roadway, and SDRD has management responsibility for that dike, including regular inspection and, on occasion, as was the case in 2018, 2019, vegetation control, just to maintain the integrity of the dike. And in this case, the project was completed and is now, it's been re-inspected, and the regional district is good to go on flood control. Thanks.
Was it one of those safety issues? One of those safety issues. Anything else on page 5? Nothing else on page 5. Let's move over to page 6. Director Hills.
Okay, I got my pages. Is number 67 on our page? It's at the bottom?
Yes?
Okay. So are we going to see the benefits of this in 2019, considering that the sport fields are heavy users? And was there ever a consideration of the rainwater capture off of Eric Cardinal Hall in terms of use of irrigation? Just so benefit of in 2019 and use of rainwater capture.
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So the most promising avenue that's been identified in this project and for which SCRD has received some grant support is the development of alternate water sources at sports fields. And staff are moving forward with groundwater source research shortly. And based on the timelines for the project, it's possible that solutions would be identified in 2019. Whether or not they would be able to come online would be subject to water license, which is my understanding is it's unlikely to be granted within this irrigation season. However, staff would also comment that through this project, behavioral changes and new technology that may be applied to fields have been identified through cross-functional discussion, and some of those approaches will be applied in 2019 that may have some reduction on the use of potable water using our current sources. Thanks.
Total side note on that. The Seashelt Golf Course, Blue Ocean Golf and Country Club, are actually very well recognized in the industry for their use of water and conservation with the golf course. So it might be an opportunity to reach out to them as well to find out what they've been doing, because other golf courses are actually reaching out to them for information. Director Ties.
Speaking of side notes, I still like the idea of looking at Cliff Gilker and maybe the golf course around Roberts Creek, as there's two creeks that go through both of those, and whether we can draw from the creek there, and that, I think, and maybe do a joint venture with the golf course even. I think there might be some potential there.
All right. Any other questions on page 6? Flip over to page 7. Go ahead, Director Hills. No, you don't have any? Oh, okay. Nothing on page 7? All right. Page 8. Last page. All right. I think we're done. Let me get back into my agenda because my computer's gone to sleep. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. On page 8 of 8, line item 13, did we cancel that recently? I thought we were doing some more work on that.
It may be timing as well. This may have been done before we actually had the discussion at the last meeting. But turn to staff on that one.
Thank you for the question. The Chapman Lake project, as discussed last week at the Infrastructure Services meeting, the project itself is cancelled. However, there's additional work required. There's some spin-off initiatives identified, and there is some financial reconciliation to be completed. But there's no additional funds being spent anymore on this project. Hence, it's listed here as being cancelled.
Would you like to comment? I think the conversation that we had was that we were going to follow up with the province on that. So while staff aren't necessarily at this point moving anything forward, I think as a board we're looking to get some response from the province first before we say this is done. I think that's kind of where you're coming from.
So that work must be listed in one of the line items we just looked at then, eh?
I think that's more letters and correspondence and advocacy work at this point.
Not funded as a project then?
Not yet.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Director Beamish.
It's a question around line 75, and I don't know if I'm on page 8 or I'm on page 8 of the document I'm looking at here. So, and that is the purchase of the replacement vehicle, Ford Ranger. Are there any usable, commercially usable natural gas or battery electric pickup trucks yet that can be considered, or do we know?
Staff?
They indeed exist. It depends on they are expensive, and it will depend on if, for example, additional cranes and additional power is required, if they meet the specs required. But yes, they exist.
Could that be looked at in the context of a purchase and at least scoped out? And especially if we get a rebate on it, it might be about some value to us.
Did you want to comment on that?
We can look into it. The question will be if the budgets would be sufficient to fund any of those purchases.
If I'm not mistaken, the rebates are now 5 and 5 from the province and 5 from the federal government. So there's potential of a $10,000 rebate on a vehicle. So it might help the budget a bit there.
Director Ties?
I believe the $5,000 from the federal government is an upper limit of $40,000 per vehicle. So the only eligible vehicle, I think, is a Nissan Leaf at this point.
Director McMahon?
Is there any sort of provincial fleet purchasing opportunities, like through UBCM or others that you know we can pool our efforts and get better deals?
Staff?
I think that's most certainly something we can look into, but I think more of in the context of how we're going to address our fleet model is how we'd like to review it. Because in ad hoc is sort of a challenge because there's lots of different implications to changing our fleet model. So where we possibly can, we do try to piggyback onto master service agreements through the province. Sometimes in our case, though, is because our vehicles are so heavily specialized, service bodies, those types of things in the water infrastructure. But in our case, it doesn't seem to be any benefit to go to that particular model, but we can explore it some more.
Director Ties?
I'm wondering if we can somehow set up a bit of a procurement policy around future vehicle purchases so that we get presented with the cheapest option as well as the option that is the most environmentally friendly, and then that we can then kind of decide as a board as to where we want to head with that, because it seems to be that question comes up over and over and over again, and I'm just wondering if we can kind of automate that process.
So I'd look to staff. Would that be a request to revisit the procurement policy, criteria, how it's presented, what would you like us to do with that?
So I think it's more in line with a fleet policy. We are contemplating bringing forward the purchasing framework for discussion at the May Corporate Services Committee. It's being drafted currently. So that could be a topic of discussion at that particular meeting and maybe staff can think about how we could approach that as we approach that meeting and draft that report.
Perfect. Thank you. Director McMahon?
Somewhere on our agenda, we have UBCM motions, and I'm just,
Yes.
perhaps we can think about whether there is a motion around this that we might want to take to UBCM.
Thank you. That's number 9. It's coming up. Okay. Any other questions, comments on our spreadsheet, our budget project status report? All right, let's move on to the next item. This is item Annex D. Starts on page 92. And the report's been received, so we're looking at recommended improvements to be incorporated in the 2020-2024 financial planning process. Director McMahon.
Sure. And thank you for the spreadsheet. That was very nice having it printed out. I'm just, the way the budget process is designed, decisions only come to the board about spending more money, never about spending less money. And I'm wondering if we have established service levels for various services like recreation where we make a decision about, what is the level of service that we wish to provide to the public within, our fiscal constraints. How would that work?
And staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. So across the SCRD, divisions are working at creating service plans and formalizing them where there aren't formal service plans. And the degree of definition of service levels varies from service to service. Recreation, I would characterize, thinking of within the context of the Planning and Community Development Department, as moderately developed. And so in the context of future planning, if information about service levels is helpful to decision making, that information could be brought forward.
Did that answer your question? Staff?
I think one of the key guiding tools in developing service plans too is the asset management planning. So asset management just doesn't look at your infrastructure, at your capital needs. It looks at, where are your risks, what is the appropriate service funding that you need to determine that. So I think this is where service plans will need to evolve at the regional district. And of course, that's the unique nature of regional district, is you would tackle service by service. So as GM Hall was saying, looking at community recreation, we would look at that in spectrum of that. But I think you also we're probably going to have a discussion about, what is the priority? We've got a lot of priorities, whether it be in our key main functions as solid waste, water, in our wastewater facilities. So those key services that we deliver and must through our responsibility through the Local Government Act. And how do you weigh those against your discretionary services, like recreation? So that's a decision that all local governments are faced with. So how we evolve through that, I think there will be a lot more to come.
And that could be a conversation that we'll have our strategic plan come back to us at some point. I mean, you have to regularize, we're only in 6 months right now too, right? So there's lots of learning, lots of stuff that's coming to us now. When we come back next year, potentially to review the strategic plan, would be when we'll have a handle on some of the basics and be able to look at some of those future kinds of conversations, which would be prior to budget again? would that be? Not necessarily. I'm just thinking of timing. Because you'd like to have some of that conversation before we get back to budget again. Yes.
Yeah, actually, Tina put it very well, that I think that we have to give some thought to prioritizing what is more important, and having the discussion in our strategic planning is a good place to start, I think.
Director Beamish.
Yeah, I've been struggling with this issue for the town. We've just gone through our budget process, and I think of the 4 meetings we had with staff to develop the budget. We had 3 people attend the final meeting of the final conversation. I think we had 1 person attend the prior 3, in total, 1 person. And then 2 nights ago, we had a budget open house where the staff had gone to a lot of trouble to prepare a lot of very good information and details on the budget. We had the mayor standing outside the sidewalk trying to pull people in. I managed to find a couple. And sitting on my phone, phoning everybody I knew who lived in the area of the town office and invited them to come. We ended up with 5 people in total in a 4-hour period of the budget open house. And so I'm thinking that one of the things we are similarly working through is our strategic plan. And I had a conversation with our administrator yesterday, and I said, I'd rather get the strategic plan right, because it seems that people are kind of either complacent about the budget, assuming it's going to happen, or maybe that's been well reported in the newspaper. But if we get our strategic plan right and people understand what we're doing, and we are consistent with that as we go forward, then I think we are maintaining our commitment and faith with the community that we will do what we say we're going to do. So I'm going to talk to council about doing getting the big picture parts of the strategic plan done so that we're satisfied with them, and then going to the community in a series of meetings on the others. And it may well be kind of an open session like we had with the Squamish, sitting down and having them take around the room each of those big pieces is part of what they want to talk about, and moving around that process. And that may not occur till, depending upon timing, until the end of the summer. But I think our focus has got to be on getting the next 5 years. Year 1 of this, 2019 is the previous council's strategic plan, where the budget and everything else, we're living with that. We are planning for the next 4 years going forward. And I want to make sure that we kind of hold our truth with the community and say, we want to hear what you want us to do, and we want to do what you want us to do, and be consistent in that. So we're going to take a little bit more time on trying to get the strategic plan right, and the budget will flow. We're always going to have operations, but those projects are going to flow from the strategic plan, and that's really the key. If nobody comes to the budget meetings, fine. We'll assume that they know what we're doing, and we're doing what we said we would do, and it will just carry on that way.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I've got two points of feedback. I'm going to pick up this thread, and this is the public engagement piece in terms of feedback. Public engagement based on the SCRD's public participation is a pretty high level of engagement. It's having discussions, identifying, and so I think what I'm saying is we need to be more specific about what we're actually telling the public we're going to do. And public engagement is like next to a referendum. It's a very high level. So and the Local Government Act isn't very specific about how to do it. It's a public process. So my feedback is reconciling the language used in the SCRD public participation framework, because mostly what we're doing is we're informing and educating, maybe a little bit of gathering information, but for the most part, we don't ask the public how to spend the money. We inform them. So the language of, public engagement is a high level of public participation. So I'm looking at reconciling the participation framework with the budget process and being more transparent about what we're actually going to do with the public. So that's the one point. So I'll come back to my other one if there's other comments.
So you're talking on page 92 where it talks about the title, it's public engagement. You're saying we're not actually engaging the public, we're informing and educating the public.
Yes, based on the IAP2 spectrum and based on our SCRD public participation framework, we're a long ways from engaging in the budget process. We're about informing and educating, maybe a little bit of consulting, maybe, but we're not asking them to tell us how to do the budget and focusing. So I just clarity around what we're actually asking the public how they're going to participate.
Okay, thank you. Director Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to congratulate Bill on his, on Mayor and Beamish on keeping his people so happy. If there's no questions and no attendance, that means you've done it right. So I'd like to say that hopefully we can meet with the people in the rural areas, especially Pender, and present the budget to them. We do have a few issues there. I can assure you, you will have a big audience. And the other thing is that I'm very interested in setting priorities at the board level. And I think we need to be more involved. We were probably as involved as we could be this year. We were in the learning mode. But for the next budget, hopefully we do have a chance to set the priorities and we all agree on them. And I'm thinking things like regional water, solid waste, that kind of thing. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz? And then we'll come Director McMahon after. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chair. This is on the budget documents, and I think the budget documents are excellent. The one part of the budget document which is difficult is the navigating through the document. So I ran the document through. There's online electronic accessibility checkers, and the one that was turned up was the lack of bookmarks. And depending on how you split it out, either you have a 280-page document or a 54-page document, and navigating there's no bookmarks to do online navigation, and it's particularly noted in the mobile devices. If you're looking at a little screen, how do you navigate a 280-page document on a little screen? So the bookmarks are highly valuable. But overall, I love the documents. The navigation could use some extra work as our agendas have the bookmarks and the navigation, and so there are online checkers to verify those accessibility issues of electronic documents.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I guess we're moving into education. It is really difficult to communicate the budget. I get that. You say budget meeting and people leave in droves. If you held the budget meeting at TAPWorks, you'd probably get more people. But it's tough.
That's an idea.
Budget meeting, AGM, auditor, those are not words that draw the public in. When we're trying to meet with community groups in the areas, the only thing I can suggest is that we use specific examples relevant to each area. So, for instance, how is the Wood Creek Park sewage treatment plant funded? That's helpful. And, when we're talking about recreation, like how is the recreation center funded? Things like that, so that people have something to attach it to. When people have a specific thing, then especially if it's smaller, then you hear about it. I have heard more about the ruddy roof of Frank West Hall. I am tired of hearing about the roof of Frank West Hall, but people clearly relate to this roof. So as much as we can make it relatable, that would be great. But I don't have big suggestions because it is very difficult.
Director Hiltz.
Coming back to the document and the language issue, I think the document could benefit from a one-page glossary to explain ad valorem and accumulated surpluses, and as we've had, so to engage the public in adapting to the language of the document, I think would be a benefit as well.
Okay, I'm going to throw a couple out here. Early incorporated mandatory increases. So I know we had a discussion during the agenda review process, and we came into this process sort of late, so it kind of got sprung on us at the end, right? I don't know, I understand that it is communicated to the public, but I think that's something that as a board and a community, we need just more information on to make sure that it's people understand that we're coming into a budget. Ties back to your piece about where are we starting and what are our service levels, and that we're not actually starting at zero. So we need to make sure the community knows that as well. And I know it was communicated, and again, new board, we may see more information this year as it comes through that we'll actually remember. Then throw something else out here. Has there been consideration given to having the budget approved by the end of December? And what would the impact of that be? Well, is that a conversation that we'd like to have? Would we want, I mean, that would be over to staff to look at what the impact of that would be. And is that a conversation we'd like to have? Director Command.
I sort of lean towards no, just in terms of the election cycle, that it would mean that every 4 years you'd have a giant monkey wrench and everything. So I think that timeline would be very difficult. But
okay, and the conversation was that our budget that we approved was pretty much based on the last strategic plan. So it would be the same for any group coming in. I don't know what the implications are. I do know that we have carryovers every year. There are a lot of capital items that are not approved until May. So what's the impact of that on staff plans and staff projects? Is that something that there would be a difference in if it was actually approved by the end of December? I don't know that. Tina?
Yeah, I think that it has been contemplated or discussed. I think that some of the process improvements that we've made over the years is we used to be the 3 rounds of budget, now we brought it down to 2 rounds, and so we were looking at, okay, let's always trying to make some improvements year by year, so hence why these reports come forward for opportunities to how do we improve the process. So what implications it would have, there might be some different strategies that we could work towards in order to, have those particular, have the budget adopted or formalized or at least materially in draft by the end of the year. When you actually adopt the bylaw could also be some of the contemplations. So staff could provide a report maybe as part of when we come to those budget planning for the 2020. We could sort of contemplate some considerations on how to move those process improvements forward from a timeline perspective. It definitely means that you'd start the process much sooner. You'd be looking probably September, and so again, we'd have to talk internally about what implications that has for staff, understanding that everybody's off generally in August. We break here for August, no meeting, so staff could review it and bring something back for consideration.
I think that would be the way to go. I don't think we'd be looking at doing that for this coming year, right, given there's a process here that we have to go through. Director Beamish?
I think we've got to remember that December is kind of like August for a lot of people, sort of thing, but having in-house stuff done. But the last 2 weeks of December is kind of a lost downtime with people. People are not thinking of the budget as much as they think of their own budgets. So that I think that, but having it done and so that in January there's a rollout of the budget early, that would probably be practical.
Would you like a motion to that, or are you just going to take that and run with it?
No, we can take and run with it. And some of the things that were contemplated in the past was as we develop service plans, asset management plans, and we have formalized capital plans included in budgets. So, for instance, in recreation and sometimes in water, less and less budget proposals then have to materialize because you're not coming cap in hand every time. So there's different strategies that we could take that reduces the width and breadth of the process. So again, lots to consider. And again, maybe we do some things in November instead of December.
Okay. Director Lee.
I have to say I really appreciate staff leading us through the budget. We had a lot to learn because we're all new and we don't have a corporate memory of what we were doing in 17 and 18. So it was a tough task for you. I don't think it'll be this hard in the coming year because we'll be adding to our knowledge rather than gathering up all of the stuff. And the other thing is I'd like to say I appreciate the changes you made to the big book. I used them at the APC last night and it went over quite well. And I'd like to make sure that that we take it to the public once it's finalized. It's a good thing to do, and we learn how to speak in public language so they understand, and we learn the process of how to engage them by bringing items of interest to a particular area, as Donna said, because that's what the people are interested in. So I think we have more learnings to do, and one of the way to do it with the budget is the follow-up and get the questions and see how your presentation works. I think that public engagement is very important. And I'd like to make sure that the board is in agreement that Tina's allowed, or whoever you choose to make those public presentations, does have the time and is allowed to put it on the work plan. So, any comments?
Staff, did you want to comment on that?
Nope, most certainly we'll take that away, and we do have some plans to go out to some of the communities in the near term, so just balancing out, I think, what's already scheduled for May. Yeah, most certainly willing to come out to some of the communities because we've already committed to coming, especially for the wastewater facilities, so maybe there's some synergies with other things that we can contemplate.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I would suggest coming out to already scheduled community association meetings because getting people out for additional meetings on a night that they're not used to is quite hard, but getting somebody on as a guest speaker at a community meeting, in fact, often they're looking for somebody to come talk, so that would be good. Next point, as much as I enjoy this board, I don't want to be here on December the 25th having Christmas in a budget meeting.
It's one of those religious holidays.
Right. One other point, two other points actually. One is GHG emissions. I would like to see how, and we'll be talking about this in strategic planning, but is there a way that we can bring a climate change lens to our discussion of our budget? Because it's got to be very important. I don't know how we would do this. I'm just throwing it out there that it's desirable.
Tina?
So through the years, the budget proposal template has evolved, and I think this is where things like energy considerations is being put on there. You'll also see that there's asset management considerations. So if there is a desire to contemplate other considerations such as GHG reductions, and we could maybe elaborate on some of those, staff can take that away. There may be some other things that you'll want to contemplate as the strategic plan evolves, so we without seeing what that is yet, we can contemplate that as well.
Okay, one more?
I did send around a notice of motion about rural director remuneration. And my motion, which probably needs amending, is that the board strike an ad hoc committee to review and recommend on rural director remuneration in advance of the 2020 budget process. What I had in mind was actually a suggestion from Director Hiltz that we should have a committee of citizens, not staff, not directors, do an independent review of our remuneration structure and make recommendations. I have large opinions about this, which I'm happy to go on about at length, but I think, sometime between now and December would be the time.
Staff want to comment on that? I thought there was a motion actually previously already brought forward.
Not specifically to the ad hoc committee.
Not specifically to the ad hoc committee, but it was around the remuneration piece. Angie?
Thank you. So there is a resolution outstanding to bring forward a policy around director remuneration, and some of that would look at what different methods to keep the rates up to date and review periodically. So the philosophy would be brought forward as part of a policy. It could be looked at then, but of course this is up to you here.
Okay. So your motion?
My motion was to strike an ad hoc committee to review and recommend on rural director remuneration in advance of the 2020 budget process.
Okay.
And
seconded. Any discussion? Director Hills.
Good discussion. I'm still waiting for the staff information, so for me, I'm not willing to support that at this time. I'd like to hear from staff and see what they're going to come up with, and then be more informed about what the next step would be. So that would be my take on it.
Okay, so clarity from staff. Your policy, would that be addressing the same type of information that Director Command's recommendation is looking at?
Yeah, so there's kind of a range of things that were contemplated at the time, whether you look at doing citizen review committees or there's a variety of different ways to look at this. And certainly even at the regional district, we've had a history of different ways of reviewing remuneration, including a citizens committee. That was a number of years ago, but there are other components to remuneration as well that could be considered, such as travel expenses and benefits and things like that could be considered all as part of that package.
So I guess I'm asking, is the report that you're bringing forward going to be looking at all of those, or would it be different than what the motion that's on the floor is actually contemplating at this point?
I think the motion on the floor is more specific. This would be a broader.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion on the floor? Director Rand.
Yeah, I'm open to other different ways of approaching this. I just want to make sure that we have a process that's going forward, and I would like the component of a citizen review because I think that's a good idea. It feels more arm's length, and I think the public would be a little more comfortable if there is a citizen review, but I'm not, it may be that we want to do a lot of the groundwork first, because you don't want a working committee that gets into the weeds too far. So
the other piece about that is some of the information may be available to staff, for example, but would not necessarily be available to public in gathering the information. Director Tice.
Yeah, I think the work of a committee such as that one could very well complement what the staff is reviewing right now, and I think you could kind of have that sort of as a almost collaborative effort there, and I think there's some value to that.
Any other comments on the recommendation on the floor? Director Beamish?
I know it doesn't impact me, and I won't vote on it, but there are other options out there. Some of the municipalities actually use a process where they'll take a group of, say, 10 municipalities of comparable size, and they'll base it on the average of those 10 on an annual rolling forward basis sort of thing. And so then it's always just automatically done, so they adjusted that way going forward. So review, coming up with a policy, we don't have to do it every year is good. I think we're stuck this time because of this federal tax issue that came up, and as well as, and you just remind me, is there a clause in the remuneration here that allows for the annual cost of living increase?
Staff?
Yeah, so that already exists, which is similar to local governments, but some local governments actually base it on an average of 10. Some will say we'll take 75% of that average, or whatever they choose to do.
Oh, everybody wants to talk. Okay, let's go. Director Pratt.
Thank you. Just wanted to know from staff when the policy is expected, or the policy suggestion is expected to come to the board. And then I think my comment, if it's expected to come prior to 2020 budget deliberations, then I'm happy to let the process that's already in place or already going go that way rather than striking an ad hoc committee.
Okay, Director, let's go to staff first. Do you have any idea when you anticipate this?
Thank you. So, of course, resourcing is a challenge right at the moment, but yes, I would anticipate that policy structure or the discussion report would be brought forward before the fall.
Thank you. Director McMahon, and then we'll go to Director Ties.
Just two things. And I would be, amenable to maybe deferring the motion if people feel it's premature. But in reference to Director Beamish's comments, the municipal councillor remuneration is not the same thing as regional districts. And we have further the problem that every regional district is different. So comparing regional districts is problematic because it's apples and oranges. All I can say is that, on the basis of my experience to date, the remuneration per meeting that I'm receiving for the amount of work that I do probably works out to something around $20 an hour. And the remuneration I receive as a rural director for the work that I do is around $1 an hour. So, I have an issue with that, and I would like to see it addressed.
Director Ties? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Could we have the motion read back, Tara?
Thank you, Chair Seegers. Recommended that there be an ad hoc committee struck to review and make recommendations regarding director remuneration in advance of the 2020 budget process.
Sorry, I said rural director remuneration.
Okay. So I guess when I'm hearing that motion, when would you want that done? Would you like the results back prior to the budget? Or you just want the committee struck before the budget, which is what the motion says?
I deliberately left it vague because I wasn't sure what staff capacity is and how the timing is for things around the budget.
Okay, so you're happy with it the way it is then? Okay. Director Pratt.
I'm actually going to make a motion to refer this to Q3 when the policy discussion is expected to come from staff.
Okay, so that's a motion. Is there a seconder for referring it to Q3 for action? Director Hiltz? Okay, any other discussion on the amendment? Yeah, on the motion to refer. It's refer, yeah. Okay, all those in favor of referring it to Q3? That's unanimous. Okay, so we still need to vote on the motion. Not referred? Because it wasn't passed. Okay. We're good? Okay, she agrees with you. Cool, thanks.
Our policy wants.
All right, anything else on the budget debrief? Okay, so we're finished number 5. Director Pratt.
I would like to say that having been to the budget presentations with our CFO, as well as part of the presentation on Eastlink, just thank you so much to our financial staff for what they've done, especially the CFO. It was really interesting to see how the presentation is customized to each group, each local government as it's being presented. And just thank you for all of your work on that, and it was great to be part of that process.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, and I think I'm seeing more visuals like charts and maps and stuff, and that's really helpful.
Okay, so on page 92, There is actually another piece to the recommendation. Now, we haven't actually written anything down with regards to recommended improvements. I know staff are taking notes. Are you fine if we just pass this as it is, given that you have notes?
Yeah, so this is sort of what's been customary is we know that part of this report evolves as there's open dialogue, and so staff kind of take that away and we consider that as part of next year's process. So for example, budget project or budget proposal, we'll just contemplate some of those things and modify the proposal, and maybe in the fall we'll just wrap it all up.
Okay, so I'd look for somebody to move the recommendation as presented on page 92. Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. And let's move on to E, Annex E. We've received the report. Thank you, gentlemen. I guess Tina's doing this one, Federal Gas Tax Fund Overview. And are you looking at this one in 6 and 7 together?
Well, we could do that. One is to report on just the status of funding, and the other is more of an information primer on the various programs for gas tax. So that's why we position the reports one right after another. So we can do both at the same time. It's up to you, Chair.
So start with 5 or 6.
So again, this is really just a report for information to provide some background on the federal gas tax fund programs, because there are several streams and sometimes it's important to understand how each one fits. So staff have provided a little background on some of the eligible projects and some of the eligible expenditures, and those relate to the 2 types of streams for gas tax. So the first stream with gas tax is what is known as the Community Works Fund, and again, that's what we're reporting on the subsequent report. And the second stream is a Strategic Priorities Fund, and that's where we were successful in receiving a Strategic Priorities Fund for our asset management. So what's different with these 2 programs is one is ongoing. You receive fund on an annual basis. You actually get payments twice a year, in November and July of each year. The Strategic Priorities Fund is where there is an actual application intake at various times of a year. There'll be certain type of streams associated with the eligible projects, and you will submit an application, and you're either successful or not successful. So it's 2 different type of programs. The regional district has to report on the use of the funds. And another thing we just wanted to highlight is that for 2019 federal budget, I think most people have heard that the federal government is going to do an additional 50% payment in July of this year. So the rural areas will be receiving more money in their community works funds, but this is going to be eligible for all of Canada. So I'll take any questions if there are any on this particular report.
Okay, I'm going to direct the board to look at page 99. Under policy and procedural development, the last 2 paragraphs, the top of the page in that section, talks about, in the past, expenditures have been incurred by the SCRD that did not result in a tangible capital asset. And that's one of the key criteria of the gas tax eligibility. So projects have been abandoned, which may not be the best use of the funds. So what staff are requesting is that we direct them to put together a policy and procedural guideline, procedural guidelines around determining the project, so that we don't have issues with projects that may start but not actually go through the completion and not necessarily fit the criteria. Director Beamish.
I guess my question is on page 96 then, under item 18, capacity building. I mean, that would not result in a tangible capital asset. That would it would increase capacity of the organization, and it could well be, I would assume, that we could pay for this strategic planning potentially under that, because it includes our ability of long-term practice. So I don't know how that's been used in the past.
Staff?
It's a good question, because it would indicate or lead you to believe that you can use it for anything capacity building related, but it's actually capacity building in relation to meeting the targets to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions or those types of things, or asset management, et cetera. So it's towards the capacity building for those other type of priorities.
Did you want to talk about the example that we talked about at the meeting before, about the landfill? That was a project, was it not? Okay.
Sorry, gap there for a minute. One of the projects, so the reason why staff are contemplating bringing more policy framework and procedural, there's many different reasons. One is the work with AVICC and developing the agreement with the Ministry of Transportation for bicycle and walkways. But what was the chair was relating to was back in about 2010 or so, the regional district was successful in receiving a strategic priorities funds, 100% funded, to do landfill gas to energy at the Sechelt landfill. At that particular time, there was equipment out there for smaller landfills to do this type of initiative. That particular company subsequently went bankrupt, and the regional district was left with expending several $100,000 worth of expenditures towards that particular project, and had to abandon and essentially return those funds back to the federal government. We were lucky we didn't have to repay the federal government for the sunk costs, but that's not something that it doesn't look favorable for the regional district. So that's kind of why we're saying we have some precedent with some of this, and we want to make sure we don't do that in the future.
Director McMahon?
That's interesting. It sounds though that would have been very hard to predict. I mean, that's an almost random occurrence. So staff would be identifying opportunities that are appropriate. Is this where we're going with the policy? For instance, Wood Creek Park sewage plant needs work, and it sounds to me, just looking at this, that it might be eligible for gas tax funding. Whether we wanted to put the funding there or not is a separate question, but the question of the eligibility sort of arises.
Staff?
So I think as we contemplate projects for grants, that's why we now report on a sort of regular basis on grant opportunities. So as we present projects too, we always give funding options. So what we haven't been consistent with all the time, but more so now, is using the community works funds for the rural areas for projects that suit. So Granthams would be a very good recent example of that. Wood Creek, I would agree with the director that most likely would be another stream if we weren't successful with any other funding or didn't have any other. So if we had constraints, we would explore other options and exhaust them as much as we could. So absolutely, and I think that's part of the contemplation, is more of a strategic view of how we use the community works funds, because the past they've been more used towards just bicycle and walking paths and not used to other projects that have already been identified for those funds.
I think you're also looking at laying out for the directors, when they're contemplating a project, particularly if we're looking at the feasibility of it, how the funds could flow if the project was determined to not be feasible. So what would that look like? Because it wouldn't necessarily then be able to be funded out of the grant funding. So where would the money come from? I think that's what's sort of behind this policy framework that they're anticipating. Director McMahon?
Have we gone back and looked at the projects we previously did with gas tax funding to sort of evaluate what value we got out of them? And I'll just give an example that there are a number of paved shoulders that were put in my area, and some of them are very successful. Some of them work really well, but some of them aren't successful. Like at the foot of the road by Bonnybrook Lodge there, that paved shoulder gets completely covered in gunk, and it's not maintained. So, we've spent the money for it, but we're not getting any real usage out of it. And so I would really want to look at what we've done in the past to see when looking at future opportunities.
Tina?
So one of the contemplations we can do, and we've actually introduced this sort of in an ad hoc approach, is when we're deciding on how to use the funds as to whether or not there's a matrix criteria that we associate with that. So, future benefit, those types of things could be contemplated if those were things that the board wants to measure in the future.
So would you see those as part of this policy framework that you'd put together?
I can make a note of that, so when we do draft, that would be one of the options for consideration.
Okay, Director Lee?
My mind was wandering a little bit, like usual. There's two sources of funding. One that's run into a holding account for us right now, and we're in the instance of Area A, we're contemplating it for walkway and bikeways on the side of roads once we have the process in place. This community works fund, is it the same thing? We just build the same pile of money and use it for the same purpose, or is there something different in order to get it? It sounds to me like listening that we have to have a project before we apply. But is that correct?
There's two funds that are indicated in here. One is the Community Works Fund, which comes automatically, can only be used for certain projects. Then there's the Strategic Projects Fund, which you apply for specific projects.
And so my question was, do we have to apply by specific projects by area in order to get that stuff done in your area, or should we as directors sit down and say, we got all these projects, let's go get some money?
I think that was a conversation we're going to have in the next report. Can you hold that one question, and let's finish this one up, and we'll move to the next report.
Sure.
Okay.
If I can remember that long.
I'll remember, because it's part of my conversation too. Page 95 then. So there is a recommendation that a policy framework be developed in Q3 of 2019 for the administration of the Community Works Fund gas tax funding. Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. And Director Hills.
Yeah, just a question on page 95, the permanentness of this money. It just seems like permanent funding is kind of too specific. It's been reliable, but permanent just sounds kind of like if fossil fuel use goes down, will the pot of gas funding actually be gone? So I'm wondering about the term permanent.
Tina?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because when this program first was introduced back, I think in 2006, that was sort of the contemplation, or with the federal government at that time, was that it was going to be for a certain term. But then that term ended, and they had a little more commitment laid out. So there is an agreement, a master federal agreement. These funds are administered through UBCM for the province, and UBCM is the one that distributes it to local government. So there's no indication but there is an expiration date to the master service agreement. So none of us have a crystal ball, but I think that for the near term, I would say for 5-10 years, there's a pretty high level of certainty that we'll continue to receive these funds.
Director Hills.
So the renewal in the 2024, is that an advocacy piece of that has to be ongoing for local governments to advocate for? And I'm wondering where that advocacy piece would be.
Yeah, and I think that's something you may hear at UBCM. So right now you may not hear anything at this UBCM because it's not imminent, but a question for your counterparts there when you go to that convention.
Any other questions on this one? All right, so let's move on to Annex F on page 100. And this is particulars on the gas tax Community Works Fund. And did you want to address that, Tina?
Yes, so this is a report that staff provide on a regular basis to the rural directors for information. Included in this particular one is essentially just your funding that has been spent, and attached on page 103 of the particular agenda is what projects are committed, understanding that any past decisions, for instance, the Granthams wouldn't be updated because there's a timing difference there. We also did highlight in this particular report, because we have the prior report, is we did report on some of those incomplete projects. So these were not carried forward into the financial plan, but we still report to UBCM and to the federal government. So they're pending on our reporting to the grantor. So we will have to address it, and we did make a commitment as part of abandoning those projects and not carrying them into, that we will revisit this whole discussion when we know more of the status of that. So we just wanted to make the board aware, because these would be some examples where we've spent a lot of feasibility funds but haven't resulted in a tangible capital asset as of yet.
Okay, so back to what Director Lee was talking about. Currently, the funds come in and they're allocated to the electoral areas by population. Town of Gibson's gets gas tax funds. So does the District of Seashell get gas tax funds. I don't know if there's ever been a conversation at this table or with the member municipalities to say, is there a project that we as a coast want to take on based on, using gas tax funds? I don't see anything that's sitting out there right now, but I think it's a mind shift that we could potentially look at, given as well that this year there's going to be additional funds coming in. Suncoaster Trail, maybe. Director Beamish.
I have suggested with our council and senior staff is that the bonus money, if you can call it, we got $251,000 of extra funding. That's double our normal funding, and that we not simply allocate that to a project right now. I have advocated setting up kind of a climate change fund that it could be used for mitigation or adaptation projects. We could look at seeing if there was a coast-wide interested in looking at something like that. We would certainly look at working on coast-wide projects as well, sort of thing. And so that there could be opportunities to do with this. One is it is serendipity. It's an election year, and with election years come opportunities, but it can be spent in a hurry, and then we'll always want more. But if we had something set aside that would have some longer-term value and thought to, and became part of a larger fund, I would certainly advocate that as well.
So we do have an intergovernmental meeting coming up. Perhaps we could add this onto the agenda there just for a general conversation. Director McMahon?
Yeah, just in general, if there's X dollars in the Area E fund, does it need to be spent in Area E, or can we each kick in so many dollars towards a larger project?
Tina?
So included in the report is that there was a past board decision that these be allocated. So I mean that's up for part of the policy and procedural framework. So there's nothing stopping any of these funds to be allocated to another function. So this is what's very different. These funds are unrestricted. They're not allocated to any one function. They sit sort of in the general government pot to then be filtered off. So they're off. I see eyebrows lifting. But so that's what's very different and unique about these. In a regional district setting, this is probably the only CAREP and this one are the only two funding sources that you'll see that are unrestricted in that manner.
Okay. Any other questions, Director Pratt?
Green light there for a second. That was strange. I think it is an exciting opportunity, especially with the extra funds this year, to look at a collaborative effort somewhere. And I would definitely support putting this on intergovernmental and seeing what happens. Having some more discussion around this.
I think it's an opportunity, given that at this intergovernmental we'll be talking about strategic plans of all of the different organizations. So I think this might be able to feed into, we might be able, once we have that regional picture, this might actually be something might come out of that. Okay, I'll get it added to the agenda. All right. Director Beamish.
Yeah, just to clarify as well, when I talk about climate change, I'm talking about water. I'm talking about fire response. I'm talking about all those things that drought management and things like that that are part of that climate change package. So.
Any other comments on Annex F? Director Lee.
So back to where I was. There's a Community Works Fund, a Strategic Priorities Fund, all through gas tax. If we do nothing, the money will still come towards us, and then we can decide how to spend it later on in the year. Is that correct?
Only from the community piece, not the strategic one. The strategic is only if you apply for a project. The other one does come to you regardless.
Okay. So do we have a plan to apply for that Strategic Priorities Fund to make sure we get our share of the gas tax money?
Tina?
So I don't believe there's any intakes at the current time, but that's part of what we report. And if there's any eligible projects, we would bring a report to the very first committee, and because part of applying for that would be a board endorsement. So
things that come to mind to me, it's things like high-speed internet in Egmont and extending water infrastructure to unserviced areas. If they qualify for the strategic priorities funding, we should be all over that. And so do we have to do it immediately or we lose it, or can we do it at our leisure and still get it? Or?
Okay, do we know when we anticipate an opening for the strategic priorities fund? Like have they indicated any kind of application timelines?
I believe fall is when the next intake is, but of course we monitor that all the time. I will note too, even though these are unrestricted funds, you do still have to have a service to allocate them to. So in the case of broadband, the regional district doesn't have a service for broadband connectivity. So that's where the caveat to that.
So if you wanted to use some funds towards broadband, you'd have to develop a service, or and get the community to agree to it, to have it be funded. Yes. Okay. So that would be another conversation.
Hence, that was my thoughts, that we need to get together as a board and decide, what our priorities are, and make sure we get that money as much as we can get of it, because we got a lot of things to do.
Yes. All right. We can have a conversation on that at the intergovernmental meeting. Make your list. Any other points on Annex F? We'll move to Annex G. This is status of operating and capital reserves as of March 31st, and it's just received for information. Are there any questions by the board on any of these? None. Let's move on to Annex H. Union of BC Municipalities Resolutions. And Director Ties, did you have something you wanted to bring forward here?
Yeah, so I've got two potential ones here. I'm pretty certain that there's been numerous attempts at the second one, and I don't know whether my contribution is going to be in any way significantly different than the ones that have happened before. But we'll go over number one first, and that would be whereas the BC government has committed itself to the Paris Accord to limit climate warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and all that is connected with it, and whereas the provincial government and the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure only provide safe and reliable infrastructure for cars in rural areas of BC, therefore be it resolved that the provincial government provide adequate funding to enable alternate means of transportation in rural and in unincorporated areas of BC, and that the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure expand its mandate to build and maintain that infrastructure. So rather than us having to spend our precious gas tax funds, that the province actually steps up and builds some bike paths. That's sort of the intention of that one. And the second one,
Do you want to discuss that one first? And see if
should we
can...
discuss the first one first?
Okay.
All right.
Would you like to make that recommendation that this be put forward?
Yeah,
And see
I
if
would
there's a
like to
second?
make that
Okay.
recommendation.
Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Second it for discussion? Any comments? Yeah, Director Van?
Is it worth looking up to see if this has previously been done as a resolution?
Angie?
Thank you. So there are different ways that we could do this, and generally speaking, when we come forward to a meeting at this stage, there are ideas that are brought forward to staff, and we can research the UBCM database, because they do prefer that we avoid repeated resolutions. That's not to say you couldn't go forward and ask for a position to be reaffirmed. We've certainly done that in the past, but we can. An option would be to take this draft resolution and look at the database. We have to bring back a report anyway, so there are options.
Okay, Director Hills?
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at the timing here, and then in the conclusion, it says on or before June 30th. So I'm kind of like, if we were to push it to the limit, there's a board meeting on June 27th, so any of these resolutions would just have to be done by that board, and so there's 2 months to kind of get this work done. Is that kind of what we're looking at?
Correct.
Okay. Director Van?
So do we actually need to move these here, or can we just make them as suggestions to staff to go forward?
How would you like us to do these? We've got 2 at this point.
If you are prepared to
Refer
vote
them
on
to
them
staff?
now or refer them to staff, either is fine.
Are you okay with referring to staff?
Yep.
Okay, so do you want to read the second one then?
Yeah, the second one would be, whereas regional districts have no control over tree cutting, and whereas in unincorporated areas with high population density, I was just kind of ballparking here, with more than 50 people per square kilometer, this would probably have to be refined. Would like some control over possible ecosystem impacts, excessive water runoff above their properties, the feel of their neighborhood, and the control over sightlines. Therefore, be it resolved that UBCM strike a task force to create regulations around tree cutting in unincorporated areas linked to population density and or other criteria that will produce the desired result. So I didn't want to just make that the limiting factor. So maybe type of ownership, whether it's fee simple or something like that, that would kind of trigger that ability for regional districts. We have to acknowledge that regional districts can't have wholesale dominion over tree cutting over their whole district, because that's a provincial thing. So,
Director Lee?
Would that intent be so that we can authorize people to chop the trees down, or what?
it would be similar to municipalities where you would actually have to apply for a permit to cut down trees on your property, so that there's a certain amount of control and oversight when you're in built-up areas, and you have some things like ecosystem impacts, excessive water runoff, and those kind of things to consider, and as well as the feel of the neighborhood and the control over sightlines.
So this would be, if we refer these to staff, they'll look at jurisdiction and, all the various pieces and come back to us on that. Director Hills?
Yeah, referring it to staff is we do have tree cutting development permit areas where the people are supposed to contact the regional district. Whether people know they are in a development permit area for tree cutting is a different category, but I would expect staff to bring them back. So there is, I understand, limited control from an environmental standpoint of DPs underneath under our official community plan. So there's some jurisdiction there.
Okay, so I've emailed both of these to Tara. So could we have the motion be something like that the 2 recommendations be, or 2 resolutions be referred to staff for research and input, and come back to the board or to the committee?
Didn't we have a motion on the floor already,
do.
so we have to?
We
yeah,
do.
okay.
We're going to change it. So we're not going to put this resolution forward, I don't think, at this point, right? Would you like to make amendment to your recommendation?
Yes, I'll amend that recommendation that we move that to staff to give us feedback on previous history and maybe and some wordsmithing and improvements. Award-winning wordsmithing. Yes, thank you.
Director Lee?
Well, we haven't had a seconder yet, but anyways, I'm not in favor of that motion. In my area, it's more like I want to cut the tree down so I can see the water, and the neighbor won't let you. So we got to be careful what we step into here. There's subdivisions that actually have covenants that says you can't stop people from having a view, and you can't grow trees so they can't see. So we've got two conflicting problems here, and I think in my particular area, there's a general consensus they have too many rules already. So, anyways, that's my thoughts.
Okay. So we have an amendment to the first recommendation. First recommendation was that this be approved by the board, I think, and the second one is that it be the amendment that has not been seconded yet is that this be referred to staff, both these be referred to staff for research and wordsmithing and have them come back to the committee. And is there a seconder for that motion? Seconder? Any other discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you. Would you like that recorded? No? Okay. Director Pratt.
Just I'm going to put this out kind of as a general wonderment about another potential motion to bring to UBCM. And it's around the BC Ferries service agreement around Route 3. And because it's something that's come up from in conversation because BC Ferries has this capital plan, and but at the same time it hasn't been approved yet by the legislature. And there's one of the things that has been made clear is that the service agreement that BC Ferries has with the province should be that it might be advantageous for local governments and community to actually advocate for a change in the service agreement. And I'm wondering if that might be something that we may want to look at bringing to UBCM for provincial support.
Okay. How would you word that?
Good Lord. That
and what type of change are you looking at?
In an increase in service for Route 3 from BC Ferries.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that's enough information for everyone.
Director Beamish, did you want to comment?
I don't know if it's consistent or the same or similar, but one of the things I was going to bring forward with our council was the idea of the gain pushing on the foot passenger ferry, both from Langdale, but also around the whole of St. Lucie, because if Vancouver is moving towards a 40-40 plan where they want to actually eliminate some gas vehicles from part of their community, we're pushing gas vehicles on ferries and sending them to Vancouver. And there are commuters, there are people who would like to just simply leave their vehicle at home and be able to take that same trip. And so I'm going to kind of look at a motion to encourage BC Ferries. As you'll recall, the general manager commented at AVICC that it would be part of the change in their mandate to be able to do that. So we have to encourage the provincial government to change the mandate of BC Ferries to consider foot passenger ferries, but looking at it also from that climate change, that impact of reducing vehicle use, and also it might also at the same time open up more capacity. It has a double-barreled opportunity there, so I think in the long term. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at, but that'll be, I don't know if that's the similar vein of what you're looking at.
Director Pratt?
I would think that they all tie together. It's all around
Yeah.
that service agreement and what the minimum service levels are for our route.
Right.
And so if we were to advocate for changes and what those changes might be, maybe increase foot passenger service, or but it has to be within the service agreement. Otherwise, it's coming out of BC Ferry's bottom line.
That's right.
So it's got to be the province that agrees to those changes. So I think there's. I don't necessarily see it as two separate motions, but I do see it as maybe a multi-layered motion. But that's definitely something I'd like to see brought forward if the board supports looking at this as maybe some other options.
It sounds like that could be an offline conversation with the directors and staff to see what components would be part of that. And Angie, I'd look to you.
Thank you. Yeah, we could certainly do that. I guess resolutions at UBCM they're often looking at provincial applicability. And so if we're focusing specifically on the Langdale route, that may be more specific than so for example, even some of the work that was related to BC Ferries kind of initiated from AVICC because it was more of a coastal communities issue. So there are options that we could look at a UBCM resolution. There might be other advocacy options to look at as well, because we are talking about a very specific area.
Okay, so how would you like to proceed with this? Do you want staff to still take it forward and see if there's some applicability that we can?
If we could still see if there's some applicability for UBCM or if there's some precedents, I would appreciate that.
Okay. Do you have a sample? Yes, thanks. Okay, and then we'll hear this and then we'll come over to you, Bill.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. That the following resolution be referred to staff to review and prepare for the 2019 UBCM convention, provincial support for increases in ferry service for Route 3 BC ferries, and potential of adding increases to passenger ferry service, foot ferry service.
I think you were looking for some slight different wording on that with regards to the service agreement. Increased service agreement. Needs to be increase of service via service agreement? Okay.
It's around the service agreement, the actual memorandum.
Okay, and Director Beamish, did you want to comment?
I was going to say one thing we shouldn't overlook is that the other opportunity at UBCM is to have direct meetings with ministers and provincial organizations, so that if it doesn't go forward as a resolution, it could still be an agenda item to take for a minister meeting and talk to.
Okay. Was there a seconder for that recommendation? Do we have one? Not yet? Okay. Is there someone who'd be willing to second that one? Seconded. Any other comments? Director Lee?
It's my day to be negative. At the AVIC convention, there was a late resolution bought off of the we're not going to consider list. And I think that the pros were all ready to talk and the cons had no time to get ready. And so they ended up passing a resolution to cut back on the herring fishery on the east coast of Vancouver Island, which was a very unscientific and hasty decision. And I'm not at all convinced it wasn't a strategy to get it by while everybody was not paying attention. Somehow I feel that we're doing the same thing here by not going through the AVIC and putting presentations forward. We're going around the process, and we're not giving careful consideration giving everybody a chance to have careful consideration prior to it going forward. So I think we have to be very careful that if we are going to put late resolutions, that they are in fact an emergency and worthwhile to consider as such. I wouldn't want us to be party of hasty resolutions, not well thought out or well discussed. So that's just something I think we should consider as we go forward here.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Yeah, we have until June the 30th, and given the time constraints we have today, I'm wondering if we can kick this over to a future meeting.
Well, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And are there any other recommendations at this point? And this could come back. I mean, we can still put it in the back of your mind that there are others could come forward.
Well, as I say, Town of Gibson's.
So we're going to whip through these next couple so that we actually have some time for lunch before our next meeting. We're on to Annex I. Any comments on these contracts? If there's no comments, we're going to move on to Annex J. And again, this was just received for information. Director Hiltz.
I'm just, it's on page 114, just looking at the totals spent so far and the budget. And I'm going, we're 1/4 of the way through. We've got 14,000 spent. The budget is 36. Multiply that by 4, it comes up to 56,000. So we're heading for the deficit. Is that how I would interpret that?
Staff?
Thank you. So I definitely monitor these accounts, but no, I'm not concerned about a deficit at this point. You sort of had some front-loaded conferences with LGLA and some of the orientation things, so I'm not worried at this stage of the game, and if I do get worried, you'll hear from me.
Any other comments? Thank you. All right, let's move on to K. Water Community Engagement Plan 2019, pages 116 to 119. And who do we want to talk to this one?
We'll need to get Remco, so
Okay.
we'll go get him. We've texted him, but
Interrupt his lunch?
no, he knows he's on deck, so.
Could we jump ahead while we're waiting for him to come, in the interest of time? Number 14. I mean, this is something else under his purview.
Yeah, so is number 15.
So number 15. And 15 we do have to have a brief discussion on. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. We're on number 12, Water Community Engagement Plan 2019, page 116, Annex K.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of communication and community engagement activities the SRD might undertake to increase public awareness and support for water conservation efforts required to address the seasonal water supply shortages in the Chapman Creek water system. These activities include 3 to 4 public events, late May 2019, ongoing outreach and education, and a water summit this fall. The Planning and Community Development Committee recommended that SRD engage consultants to work with staff on the organization of the public events on water in May 2019. These events serve a public information purpose, providing opportunities to share information with respect to the changes to the drought management plan and updates on the status and timelines of the water supply expansion projects. The events may also serve a community engagement purpose on themes relevant for the long-term water supply strategy for the Chapman Creek water system. This includes engagement on themes as integrated watershed management, community involvement in watershed protection, water conservation initiatives, and climate change adaptation. Staff recommend to fund the consultant and other costs associated with these public events from the operational reserves from the regional water service function. Staff will be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Director Hiltz?
I'm back to the language of the SCRD public participation, and this language of engagement is a loaded word, and I'd just like some clarity around what we're actually going to want them to do. Are we going to push information out, or are we actually going to ask them how we want to run the water system? So this is the engagement. So I would like to see it, the SCRD public participation framework somehow tied into this. Right, so that's kind of my comment on it, and I'm not sure what.
And staff, do you have a comment?
We would use the public engagement, public participation toolkit framework as a guiding framework while developing the scope and the setup of the meetings.
So given timelines, at this point you're looking at us approving the $30,000 and that we basically have having it showing up in our budget. If we're looking at doing this in May, is there time for further information as what Director Hiltz is looking for to come back to the board or to a committee prior to? Timing might be really tight to have that happen, right? Okay. I mean, I understand what you're saying. You're looking at how are we setting it up inside of the IAP2 guidelines. Are we actually engaging with the community? Are we looking at informing them and, doing some kind of consultation or something? But yes, further.
Well, and to go with the spectrum, it's the public needs to know how their input is going to affect the decisions. Like if we go out there, I'm going to take the short-term rental we went to a meeting and the people thought we were going to change how short-term rentals are looking rather than be told what short-term rentals looks like. So yeah, I've got some great concerns that we're going to have this engagement, this participation, and the desired result isn't what we're looking for. So I think we need some clarity about, are we informing? And then it looks like the Water Summit is more of an engagement piece. So the relationship between those two components.
Director Lee?
My recollection, thank you, Chair, by the way. My recollection is that we were looking to inform the public about the possibilities of the drought problem that we got and the fact that it's real and we need their participation. And part of that communication was to tell them that we're working on a long-term solution and when the earliest we can expect it to be, rather than, and I would think that the third item would simply be that we're going to have more community engagements and start talking about the long-term solution. And I think that's why we needed the May for this. And so I think the May presentation is a simpler presentation than the actual community engagement in getting them involved in the long-term planning, well, the near and long-term planning.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. The way it is framed out in the report is that in line with the public participation framework is that there's information sharing on the changes around the DMP and more engagement on the other topics more towards the future oriented, and those can then be a lead up to a water summit where which could be the primary engagement, community engagement event.
Director Hiltz, do you have any comment? That was to your question.
Yeah, so whether the I'm not sure how applicable open space is to pushing information out to the information. That's what I'm not sure if open space is the right format for the education piece. That's kind of.
I think the format would be giving information and then potentially having an open space session after that. It wouldn't be how the information was given out. It's not designed for that. Okay. Director McMahon?
I think we're getting to the idea here that in the short term we are communicating, in the long term we are engaging. My concern is that the whole purpose of hiring a consultant would be to advise us on how to best communicate. And so I don't want to be too prescriptive, because it seems pretty clear that our past attempts to communicate have not been really successful in changing public behavior. So we may need to completely change up how we're communicating, and I realize that the time is short. It's a very difficult time frame, but it's very important to do this.
I agree. Director Pratt.
Thank you. There's a lot of, because there's so much angst out in the community, and having sat down with the editorial board at the Coast Reporter, and having a panel of reporters asking me questions around water, which is, I've noticed I've gotten a tweet that it's already upline, so I'll send it out to everybody. But there's a lot of angst in the community, and I really do see it as that two-pronged approach, that education, because I mean, we're pushing out the information about what we're doing. We've got it all through the website. I'm watching it get tweeted out and shared on our Facebook page from here, but it's not sinking into the community. And trying to engage in certain forums on Facebook are not working either. It's bringing the people out, actually having this. I don't want to be too prescriptive until we've heard from the consultant as well. I think this is just a great innovative way for us as the elected officials to engage with our community, as well as inform them. And it's a two-pronged approach, because we really need them on board to help us fix this issue, whether or not it's just telling them what we need to do in the short term, long term, asking for ideas that we might be missing, or hearing what else is going on out there. So I'm fully in support of what we've got here, and I do see it really as a two-pronged information as well as engagement within these sessions. So,
and I think whoever we engage would actually put the strategy together. So I'd look for somebody to make the recommendations, as on page 116. Second. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Move on to Annex L, pages 120 to 122. Sorry, I'll find the page, and then Mr. Rosenboom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually not going to introduce this report myself, but I'm going to introduce my new neighbor. Steve Misrak is, since last December, our manager of capital projects, and he's hired to develop primarily for the development and implementation of our water supply project. So this is the first project he will introduce to you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. At the February meeting of the Infrastructure Services Committee, the results of the raw water reservoir study was presented and discussed, as well as the scope for the Phase 3 study. Since then, staff has been negotiating with the consultant on a contract for the execution of the Phase 3 feasibility study. The major portions of work to be completed by the consultant for the study are summarized in your committee packet. The purpose of this report is to request the committee's support for this contract. Staff therefore recommends to award a contract for the raw water reservoir feasibility Phase 3 study to integrated sustainability in the amount of $327,532. This includes an 18% contingency allowance built into the budget. If awarded, the results of the Phase 3 study will be presented to the board in the late 2019 or Q4. Staff also further recommends this contract be forwarded to the April 25th, 2019 board meeting for adoption consideration. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions? Director McMahon.
Yes, I asked this in February, but I'm going to ask again. I don't see on the list evaluating the GHG emission impacts of the various options, both in the short term, e.g. construction, and in the long term, e.g. operation. And I was assured that that's in there, but I don't see it in there. So I'm just asking again.
Staff, could you address that?
Thank you for the question. It has been noted by staff in February, and even though it's not specifically listed, we'll ensure that it will be included in the assessments.
Director McMahon, you okay with that? Thank you. Director Lee?
I remember a request from the board that we look at a possible site below the Chapman Dam for another dam. Would that be included in this phase, or is that a separate item, separate work item? It's a separate work item? Okay, thank you.
Director Hill?
Yeah, quickly. Yeah, I'm supportive of the recommendations. My quick question is the construction cost estimates. Well, we were at kind of a loose D, and we'll go to a more of a C kind of estimate. Is that where we're heading?
Staff, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. It will be refined, and there'll be drawings also produced as part of the assessments and stuff like that. So it'll be a further tightened estimate, construction cost estimate, and drawings as well will be provided at the conclusion of the study.
Director Lee?
Is there any way we can move up the timeline of this?
I was going to ask the same question. Staff?
Thank you for the question. This timeline is in part based on field work that is required. And so we're trying to expedite it as much as possible, but we also want to ensure that it's quite a large scope, that we do it well. And our full intent is to have it finalized as soon as this phase completed as soon as possible, so that it at least can feed into a next year budget cycle, and it will be ideal, and we'll aim for that if possible to have it finalized prior to a summit, a water summit. We'll see what we can do there.
Director Ties?
Yeah, just a comment, and while I agree that we need to do this feasibility study, I guess, at this point, but the approval of a raw water reservoir, I don't think should be fast tracked because there's some other low-hanging fruit that gives us more bang for our buck. One is, of course, wells, and then the other one, in my opinion, is also getting the water meters universally installed. That would be a way to get more water into our system for less money.
Okay, that's a comment. Any other comments, questions? Director Pratt?
I'm just going to move the recommendations on page 120 and include what I heard from our manager about moving it to this afternoon's board meeting as well.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one final project, or one final item on here. No, we've got two items on here yet, yes. Number 14, Annex M, page 123. This is with regards to a contract award for Henry Road water main replacement asphalt works. And again, I'll turn to staff.
Thank you, Chair Sears. Staff recently completed the water main replacement project along Henry Road. This included the upgrade from an asbestos cement water main to a steel one. On March 22, 2019, RFP was issued for repair of the asphalt pavement impacted by this project. The RFP closed on April 12, 2019, and only one compliant bid was received. Staff therefore recommend that the Henry Road water main replacement asphalt works contract be awarded to BA Blacktop in the amount of $128,599. Staff also recommend a contingency allowance of $25,720,000, which is about close to 20% of the total budget. This project will be fully funded out of the 2019 base capital budget for water main replacement in the regional water system. Staff further recommend that a recommendation be forwarded to the April 25th, 2019 board meeting for adoption consideration. Staff would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions by the board? Director Hiltz.
Quick one, yeah. I'm in support of the recommendation. It just kind of ballparking figures. I'm measuring. It's a 500-meter stretch of road, $125,000. There's some temporary work, a little bit of fill, but we're roughly talking about $250 per linear meter. So that's kind of, if we're thinking about roads and bike paths, this is kind of the, what we're talking about is for a 6.5-meter wide road on the Sunshine Coast cost $250 per meter.
Staff?
No, that's not the case. It really depends on the distance between the plant and where the work are located, and the width of the asphalt that needs to be replaced, if it's patching or single line or sometimes even double lane paving. In this case, it's single lane.
Director Lee?
Should we be looking to put a walking and bike path in at the same time as we pave?
Did staff want to comment on that?
We currently don't have the funds or right away to even consider that.
All right. Is there anybody who'd like to make the recommendation? And would you like to add the part about bringing it to this afternoon's meeting? Yes? Okay. That's moved. Seconded. Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Now we have one more item. Annex N, page 126 through 128, and this is about the 2019 Sea-Watch property utility billings. And I'll turn over to staff.
Thank you. I'll just provide a brief introduction. So as part of the Sea-Watch evacuation, the regional district staff have been contacted by some of the residents as far as doing some reductions to their user rates and parcel tax for 2019. Also, we've been collaborating very closely with our colleagues at the District of Sechelt and understand that a recent report and motion was approved, which is included in your agenda. So there are some contemplations for the regional district because we do have some considerations from our bylaw perspective. So that's been contemplated in the report here. So staff have provided a motion for the board's consideration, and they're here to answer any questions, whether directly related to bylaws, the operational requirements, etc.
Any questions by any of the directors?
May I add something to that?
Yes, please.
I would like to add that the staff report indicated that the water mains in the Sea-Watch area would be shut off as of May 1st, given that there was no active use. Since the report was distributed, staff received additional information from District to Sechelt staff about potential impacts to residents, to their properties of a shut-off of the water main. Staff consequently decided to postpone any shutting off of these water mains and will discuss any mitigation options with District of Sechelt staff and residents before any further decisions will be made on shutting off these water services.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing that. That was my concern. We don't know if there's some. We have a few of the houses up there where all the belongings are still in the house, and we are looking at how they get access to them and get those out. But in the meantime, they may be heating them using hot water heating. We don't know. So thank you for doing that work and checking that out. Any questions? Director Lee.
If the water main breaks on the other side of our turnoff, we'll just turn it off. So I don't think there's an emergency on the actual turnoff.
So there are recommendations? So moved. Is there a seconder? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any emergency items being brought forward? No new business? I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Seconded? All in favor? Yes. Thank you very much. Media. Any questions by the media? Connie? When is it? May 16th? May 16th. Yes. Yeah, that was rescheduled, so yes. We just got it confirmed yesterday. District of Sechelt. Any other questions? Sophie, anything for you? Okay. All right. Any questions? Okay. Thank you all. Let's go eat.